It's been a minute since I've done any Q&A on the channel, and people seem to like sending me questions, so let's do some Q&A. Before we begin, I want to mention that Old Grappler Summit #2 is coming to San Diego, California this October 11th, 12th, and 13th, 2024. It's a 3-day jiu-jitsu and social event for the over 40 crowd, where we will discuss strategies and techniques and solutions for dealing with those young athletes that give us a hard time on the mat. If you're interested in finding out more, just go to my website, rickellis.com, and click the events tab. Don't wait to sign up. Our last event sold out very, very quickly, and I have a feeling that this one's gonna sell out real fast too. So look forward to meeting you, and I look forward to training with you, and I look forward to hopefully helping your game and helping you be more effective on the mat against those young athletes. Is it better to spar against people that are better than you or worse than you? If you think about the nature of jiu-jitsu, sparring in jiu-jitsu, it's decision-making on the fly. An old coach of mine used to call it like playing Tetris. You've got these pieces that are moving and you have to align them before it's too late. And that's how jiu-jitsu is. A window of opportunity opens and then it closes. And if you're able to get yourself into the proper positioning during that window, now you have a chance at maybe getting a sweep, getting a submission, getting out from a disadvantaged position, and so on. If you are training against someone who is better than you, generally you're not going to be able to take advantage of those windows of opportunities. You're going to be behind. They're going to be ahead of you the whole way, which means all you're going to really be able to do is practice your defense. And that's very valuable, but if you want to develop a really good, effective offense and all you're doing is training against people that are better than you, that's going to be a very slow way to progress in jiu-jitsu. It's my opinion that you should train sub-maximally against people that are less skilled than you more than you do people that are more skilled than you. Probably 60%, 70% of the time that you train, that you spar, you should ideally be going against people that are a little bit less skilled than you, because then the rolling session becomes a form of dynamic drilling. Right? You're able to get yourself to that next spot before they can counter. You're able to stay ahead. You're able to, practice the things you're learning in jiu-jitsu a little bit better because this person is not as skilled. And then you should train against people that are more skilled than you. That's the reality check, though. That's the measuring stick. And those are the ones that are really going to force you to get your defense together. And then when you go against people that are at your level, those tend to be the most epic battles in jiu-jitsu, those guys that you come up with, that you're neck and neck with. And of course, you're going to want to have those roles as well, but those tend to be the highest intensity roles that we experience in jiu-jitsu. So you're probably not going to learn a lot during those roles. Really, it's when you spar against people that are less skilled than you, that's when you're able to really develop. I experienced that when I opened my school because it was all white belts in the room. I feel like that first year or two of training in that environment, as I was bringing these newbies up, it really gave me a chance to make sparring be whatever I felt like it being on any given night. I could work on my pet projects and focus on, improvements in areas that I was interested in just by getting myself into those positions while I was drilling. And so that's really important. Roy Harris, who is my grandfather in jiu-jitsu, I'm under Roy Dean, he's under Roy Harris. He said a long time ago, I remember he said that he found that when he opened his school many, many years ago, that he progressed more in that first year than he had in just about any other one-year period in his journey. So find people that you can spar against that are not as skilled as you. It's going to let you dial the intensity down. It's going to give you more longevity in the sport. You're not going to be as beat up if you're able to spar against people where you're able to take the lead on. And then again, spar against your contemporaries if you want those real battles, and then against the ones who are better than you, just as the reality check. I've been training for about a year, and although I'm in much better shape than when I started, I still gas out pretty much every roll. What's the best way to get in shape for jiu-jitsu? Thanks. I love your content. You're very welcome. Let me say a couple things here. First of all, I did an entire video on this subject called Maximum Fitness for Jiu-Jitsu. It's one of the early videos on this channel, and I go really deep on a lot of training methodologies for Jiu-Jitsu. And if you want to do a deep dive into that, I recommend you go watch that video. Here's the thing. When you are a white belt, by definition, you are inefficient. Jiu-Jitsu is really about becoming efficient. When you watch a purple belt, a brown belt, a black belt, what do you see? You see a lot of efficient movement. You don't see a lot of extraneous movement. You see precision. You see, you don't see a lot of needless activity. On the other hand, when you watch a white belt spar, you see a lot of muscular exertion in ways that are not particularly productive. Because at white belt, everything feels like a threat. And so you're constantly on guard, right? And it becomes a little herky-jerky, and you're just using a lot of muscular energy very, very inefficiently. You also haven't really adapted your body to the demands of doing jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is, as I have said many times on this channel, jiu-jitsu is a movement art. Every technique in jiu-jitsu, whether it's a transitional technique, a finishing technique, or a defensive technique, is a movement pattern or a series of movement patterns. And the longer you train, the more you will adapt your body to being able to do those patterns in ways that are efficient and not as physically taxing. So on the one hand, when you're a white belt, even a blue belt really, is that you're never going to be able to get yourself in good enough shape to overcome the fact that you are fundamentally inefficient at jiu-jitsu. And you simply have to accept that. You have to understand that this is a phase that you're going through. After 2-3 years of training, you are going to be naturally much, much more efficient at jiu-jitsu. And so don't be frustrated if you're trying to do cardio, trying to go to the gym and get in shape, and you're doing, all the extracurricular work to be in shape for jiu-jitsu, and you're finding that you're still gassing out. Understand that you have to, first of all, get yourself efficient, and that's going to take a while. Now, as far as how to get yourself in shape for jiu-jitsu, I think the biggest bang for your buck is cardiovascular fitness. The times when my game is the best, it's when I have a big gas tank where I don't get tired. In combat sports, they always say the person that gets tired first loses, and that's absolutely true. We see it in the UFC. We see it in grappling matches. Somebody comes out really strong the first round, and then the second round they get a little tired, and all of a sudden the tables shift. So I would focus on cardiovascular fitness. It can be things like hill sprints, some kind of HIIT training, some kind of high intensity interval training. You can go out on a bike. I mean, there's lots of ways to get cardio. You can pick your favorite one. I would primarily focus on that. And then, of course, we do use our muscles in jiu-jitsu. How many times do we leave the dojo after training and our forearms are really pumped, and our biceps and our core feels like it worked, and our neck is all pumped up? And so, yeah, we do use muscular energy. We need muscular endurance when we do jiu-jitsu. So, some kind of weight training program. I'm a fan of keeping things simple, right? Complexity is the killer in every domain. You want to keep things simple. And so I'm not a fan of doing splits where you're doing, lower body one day, upper body another day, and all that stuff. No, just full body workouts. Keep it simple. There are 4 major movement patterns: squatting, hinging, pressing, pulling. So pick something from each of those different patterns: a squatting movement, some kind of hinging movement. It can be deadlift. It can be kettlebell swings, some kind of pressing movement. It can be bench press. It can be overhead press. and some kind of pulling motion. It can be pull-ups, it can be lat pull-downs. Any of those kinds of things are great. Add some loaded carries in there. Do a little bit of flexibility work, a little bit of yoga, get your cardio session in, and I think it'll serve you very, very well. Eventually, with enough training, then you can really start optimizing your fitness. Initially you need adaptation. Eventually you can focus on optimization, but when you're new at jiu-jitsu, you don't need optimization yet because you're going to be inefficient. So keep training and do some cardio, lift some weights, and I think you'll do better. Watched your peptide video, so I'm wondering how it worked. I'm dealing with a knee injury, so I'm curious whether peptides might help me. If you're not familiar with peptides, you should watch the video I did on that subject called The Wolverine Stack, where I talk about 2 different peptides that I used in order to help heal from a clavicle injury. I dislocated my sternoclavicular joint, the SC joint right here. And when I did that, it ended up tearing the pec minor. It completely kind of altered the geometry of my shoulder, and in doing so caused a lot of nerve pain and nerve issues in my neck, in my shoulder, in my scapula. I was very frustrated. For about 3 months, I wasn't able to train jiu-jitsu. I was in a lot of pain. I was struggling to sleep at night. I've always been a side sleeper. Sleeping on my injured side was a no-go. It was too painful. Sleeping on my other side was too painful as well because everything would just kind of compress. So instead, I had to train myself to sleep on my back, and in order to not have as much pain. And so I decided to do this peptide protocol that I had heard good things about. I had some friends tell me about it, and I did some research. I did a lot of research. I studied it and figured out the dosing and all that stuff. I did 2 peptides. One's called BPC 157. The other is called TB 500, or thymosin beta 4 is the other name for it. I did a 2-month protocol on both those peptides. And while I can't prove definitively that it helped me, I am convinced that it did. And the reason I can say that is I was not able to train jiu-jitsu. I tried to train through this, and what would happen is I would go train, I would get massive nerve pain in my neck, I'd have to cut my training short. The next day, the next few days, I would be completely jacked up with a lot of nerve pain and shoulder pain, and just stuff hurt. Within 2 to 3 weeks of being on the peptide protocol, it all really calmed down. I had better range of motion in my arm. I was able to sleep better. It just felt like things were now progressing in a positive way. About 4 or 5 weeks after starting that protocol, I went back to training, and I've been training ever since. And the biggest difference is I go train, and yeah, it still flares up. I still sometimes have to cut my training a little bit short. Sometimes I have to manage it a little bit carefully. And when I go home the next day, I'm always a little bit flared up. But by the next day, it's calmed down again, and it feels like I can go back and train again. And so I'm still having to manage it a little bit carefully. I'm not 100% healed. I'm still going to PT. It's been a journey for me, this thing. And I know 2 people that have dislocated their clavicle. They both tell me it's like a year to get over this. And in my case, it's probably going to take a year because I've got these nerve issues, and I've got this pec minor that's really a problem as well. But I do think the peptides helped. And by the way, I put my girlfriend on that same protocol. She broke her foot. Luckily, even though it was a complete break in her foot, it didn't displace, the bone didn't displace, didn't dislocate. And so she didn't need to be on a cast. They put her in a walking boot initially, and then told her she could take the boot off as tolerated. Well, I put her on the same protocol that I was on, and within 5 weeks, we were at my son's wedding, and my girlfriend was dancing on the dance floor in high heels after 5 weeks with a broken foot. So I think the peptides really helped her as well. Again, I can't prove it conclusively. It's not magic. It's but it does seem like it really assisted in the healing process. And I'm looking forward to trying some other peptides as well. There's some muscle building peptides. There's, a variety of peptides out there. And it's a very interesting area in, the world of, functional medicine and regenerative medicine and sports physiology that a lot of people are exploring. And I'm certainly a fan of this stuff. Curious what your favorite martial arts movie is. I am not a huge martial arts movie buff, in part because I think the UFC kind of ruined martial arts movies for me. Prior to UFC, prior to 1993, there was a lot of fantasy in martial arts because we had no way of testing. There was no way of knowing whether judo was better than silat or whether karate was better than, Wing Chun. And so there was a lot of conjecture. There was a lot of, people that developed belief systems that were untested. And a lot of that was reflected in the movies, the Karate Kid and all the Bruce Lee movies and, all those crazy movies that we used to watch as kids. But UFC came along and then began answering that question of which martial arts are best. And it turns out that generally the holy trinity of martial arts is the way to go. Some kind of kickboxing, some kind of wrestling, and jiu-jitsu. And so as a result of that, it's hard to go back and watch some of these fantasy martial arts movies without thinking, man, that's just ridiculous. Now, that said, there are a few movies that I like that I've watched. One is one that I've watched recently. My girl and I just finished season 1 of Shogun on Hulu, and that movie was phenomenal, or it's a TV series, was phenomenal. The cinematography was insanely beautiful. The music was beautiful. Now, strictly speaking, it wasn't a martial arts movie, but it did take place in feudal Japan with lots of swords and beheadings and all that stuff. And so in a sense, it really was a glimpse into that period during feudal Japan. And I loved that movie and highly recommend it. Other movies that I liked Ong Bak. That was a movie about a Muay Thai fighter, and it was pretty good. A movie called Warrior, I really enjoyed. It was a mixed martial arts movie. It was about a decade or so ago that I saw it, and I don't remember the details too much right now, but I remember really liking that movie. What else do I like? I mean, the John Wick series is pretty good if you like martial arts. And David Camarillo, who is an incredible jiu-jitsu and judo black belt, was the fight choreographer on the John Wick series. And it's amazing kind of martial arts on display, made more so by the fact that Keanu Reeves really trained hard. He put himself through it to learn those moves and to be able to, showcase that stuff. I think the Jason Bourne movies had some good fight sequences in them. I don't know. I'm not much of a movie buff, but I'm thinking Shogun is probably the latest one that I would recommend because that was amazing. I've heard Gordon Ryan say that he thinks gi jiu-jitsu will disappear in the future. Do you agree? No, I don't agree. I mean, look, Gordon is the best in the world, and he has made a name for himself in the world of no-gi jiu-jitsu. And it can be argued that he and his contemporaries, maybe some of the 10th Planet guys and so on, have really elevated no-gi jiu-jitsu to being almost its own sport. Gi jiu-jitsu and no-gi jiu-jitsu are almost different sports now, even though, they're largely the same. Personally, my gi game and my no-gi game are really identical, with the exception of some gripping changes and a few differences here and there. So I don't think they're all that different. But in terms of the public perception and the sport of it, they do seem to be branching and going their own way. Does that mean that at some point gi jiu-jitsu will be dead? I don't think so. I think that a lot of people like the gi. I like training in the gi. I think it's practical. A lot of people say gi jiu-jitsu is not practical because people don't wear pajamas out in the real world. No, but they do wear clothing. and knowing how to manipulate people, control people using cloth can be very, very valuable. People wear jackets, people wear t-shirts. You can choke someone with a t-shirt. You can choke someone, you know, in a collar shirt. And knowing how to do those things can be very valuable. But I also think that there is something about the tradition of jiu-jitsu and the belt system that appeals to people a lot. People like wearing a belt. I mean, rank brings privilege. Rank brings respect. If you're a blue belt, the white belts look at you as someone to strive to be like. If you're a purple belt, the blues and the whites look at you as someone to strive to be like. And so I think the belt signifies the position within the hierarchy of jiu-jitsu. And I think that's a very powerful thing. It's a powerful motivator. And I think a lot of people like that. So no, I don't think gi jiu-jitsu is going away. I think these things kind of ebb and flow, but ultimately I think the gi is going to be here for a very long time. Everybody talks about all the different benefits of doing jiu-jitsu. In your opinion, what is the single best benefit? Well, the obvious answer is self-defense, because hopefully if you're training a martial art, you're gaining the skills necessary to be able to defend yourself if you would find yourself in a self-defense encounter. But I'm not going to go with self-defense. I think that that's an ancillary benefit. I think there are more powerful benefits, especially because we live in a relatively peaceful society and most people never have to defend their lives with their martial art. I've been training 20 years. I have never had to use my jiu-jitsu, and it's probably because you get humbled so much in jiu-jitsu by virtue of the fact that you have to tap and tap and tap, and that goes on for years and years and years. I mean, it never really goes away, that you become very, very humble, and therefore you're much less likely to be the guy who, puffs up your chest and gets into an altercation with somebody at the bar. So, not that self-defense isn't important, and certainly jiu-jitsu would give you self-defense, but to me, that's not the primary benefit. What do I think the primary benefit is? Well, first, what are the benefits of jiu-jitsu? Well, there's fitness, of course. You're going to get in shape. There is the fact that it's difficult, and there's something powerful about doing difficult things. The fact that it has a meditative quality. When you're rolling, all your problems vanish for that hour. It can be very restorative kind of mentally to train jiu-jitsu. The camaraderie, the friendships you meet, the fact that you're learning real interesting skills, the fact that you're going to get more coordinated, you're going to be more capable physically. So, in my opinion, of all those things, the greatest benefit is the fact that jiu-jitsu makes you comfortable with discomfort. Think about how many times you get smashed when you train jiu-jitsu. I've been doing this again 20 years and I get smashed every time I go train. And you get so conditioned to having that body-on-body contact, to have someone grabbing at you, to have someone, trying to expose an arm for a joint lock or a leg for a leg lock. They're trying to choke you, they're trying to dominate you, they're trying to pin you down, they're trying to take your back. It makes you very, very comfortable with the discomfort of all that to the point where it's really no big deal at all. And I think that that is probably the biggest benefit in terms of a self-defense situation. The fact that if you have to interface with somebody in a self-defense situation, man, you have done that a million times, on the mats. And so it's going to feel very, very familiar to you, which means you're going to be calm under pressure. You're going to be able to manage that situation in a way that allows you hopefully to survive. You've got some jiu-jitsu skills that you can bring to bear, but really it's the training methodology of jiu-jitsu, the live training methodology where we're constantly, battling against each other. I think that is going to give you the greatest benefit of all. I love your What Do the Belts Mean series, but I'm curious whether you think different belts have different obligations. That's a pretty interesting question because the belts certainly have requirements. To earn a blue belt, there are certain requirements. To earn a purple belt, there are certain requirements. But are there obligations that come with that? I would say that generally in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no, there are not obligations that come with those belts the way there are in Japanese arts a lot of times. In Japanese arts, as your belt darkens, you're expected to become a senpai, and a senpai is a senior student that helps transmit knowledge and serve as a guide and an example to younger students and so on. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we don't have that kind of hierarchy. Now, that said, there are certainly, there's certainly philosophies out there that are espoused by various people. Carlson Gracie wrote his, 12 or 14-point manifesto of what he thinks the proper attitude and the proper way of training is. And there have been a lot of others that have done that kind of thing. But those aren't really obligations, that are codified, that are expected of students. And so while it's an interesting question, I think the casual nature of jiu-jitsu is such that, no, there aren't really obligations that students are held to. I've heard some BJJ black belts say you should focus on the fundamentals. What do you consider to be the fundamentals? The fundamentals, in my opinion, revolve around the 4 primary positions of jiu-jitsu: mount, back, side control, and guard. And so it's those primary positions where you will spend most of your time as a beginner, and maybe some half guard, maybe some butterfly guard, maybe some sweeps in there, maybe some leg locks, maybe some takedowns in addition to that. But the bulk of your training is going to be those 4 primary positions. And in my view, the defensive side of that is more important as a white belt than the offensive side of that. So focusing your efforts on side mount escapes, back escapes, guard passes is really going to pay the dividends that you want, more than trying to focus on offensive techniques when you're early in your journey. Why is that? It's because your finishing rate as a beginner is going to be very, very low, because what you need in order to submit people is control. You need positional control, you need positional transitions, and you need positional control. Eventually, that turns into positional dominance, where you are very, very dominant from those controlling positions, and that's when the submissions become much more reliable. And so I'm a big proponent of focusing on those defensive techniques. They're not real sexy, but they will serve you well for years and years to come. And then, of course, focus on, the offensive techniques that are part of those 4 positions. Nothing crazy, straight arm lock, bent arm lock, Kimura, Americana, triangle chokes, omoplata, collar chokes are fundamental. Some basic sweeps are very fundamental, some basic takedowns, basic guard passes, under the leg pass, basic knee cut pass, maybe a double under pass, and those sorts of things. So I would consider those techniques and positions to be fundamental to jiu-jitsu. Rick, you are an inspiration. Curious how you would rank the most popular martial arts from best to worst. Thank you. I'm honored when I hear that I'm an inspiration to people. I divide all martial arts into 2 categories. There are live arts and there are dead arts. Live arts are martial arts in which they spar. And we know which ones those are: jiu-jitsu, the various forms of kickboxing, Muay Thai, Dutch kickboxing, Indonesian kickboxing, some forms of karate, judo, wrestling, sambo, catch, Western boxing. These are all live arts that are trained at resistance, and versus dead arts in which you are simply practicing patterns. You're training kata, you're punching and kicking the air, you're just doing forms practice. And not that I don't think those things can be valuable, but if that's all you're doing, you're not really training for effectiveness. So I would automatically just weed out all of the martial arts in which they don't spar. And so the best martial arts are going to be on this side of the ledger, which is all the arts that do spar. And now the question is, which arts are best? And the answer to that is, how do you define best? Best for what? Best for what purpose? Because until you define what you mean by best, it's going to be very hard to rank those. And that's particularly true because every martial art operates at a different range. Kickboxing is a different range than grappling arts. And so, in my opinion, if you want to be the most well-rounded, you should pick a grappling art, a takedown art, and a striking art. And if you want to be really well-rounded, on top of that, you should study some kind of weapons art, like Filipino, knife fighting, stick fighting, that sort of thing. You should probably learn how to shoot a gun, how to shoot a rifle, and do all that training, some, CQB training, all the various, types of training that you encounter in the gun world. And so that would make you the most well-rounded. And so it sounds like I'm hedging this a little bit because I'm not really ranking them from best to worst, because I think honestly that's going to be very, very difficult to do when the goal of each martial art is different. Kickboxing serves a different purpose than wrestling. And so I suppose you could rank the styles of kickboxing, and you might say Muay Thai is superior to Dutch kickboxing. But honestly, there are incredible proponents of all those styles. Kung Lee was a master of Sanshu, which is a Chinese form of kickboxing. Bas Rutten was a Dutch kickboxer. And you've got Muay Thai guys. And so I'm not going to try to rank those. I think those are all excellent, and you're really just kind of splitting hairs if you're trying to claim that one is better than the other. I think they're all fantastic. Train a live art, stay away from the dead arts, or if you're going to train a dead art, train it with eyes wide open, where you understand why you're training that art, because there are reasons you might train, kendo or silat or any of these other things. There are reasons for that might bring you some benefits despite the fact that they don't spar. But if you're looking for effectiveness, combat effectiveness, stick with arts that spar.